And so when the Meccans come to try to fight Medina at the Battle of the Trench, they ally themselves with the Meccans. When the Muslims did not lose the battle, when it came to a stalemate, the Jews then had to pay for their betrayal, as Muhammad put it. There is a possible reference to this event in the Quran, chapter 33, verse 26, when it says that some of these were given over to slaughter. Some of these Jews who had betrayed had been given over to slaughter. So there's a reference to this event in the Quran, potentially. We know from Sunan Abu Dawud, number 4390, that the men were all killed, and it was told very explicitly how. If you were a man who had clearly reached puberty, you were beheaded. If it was unclear whether you'd reached puberty, so if you're a 12, 13, 14-year-old boy, 11-year-old boy, somewhere in there, they would have you drop your pants. And if it was determined that you had reached a stage of maturity, then they would behead you. And this report is given by a boy who was at that time forced to show whether or not he had reached maturity, and he had not, so he survived. That story is accounted for in Sunan Abu Dawud. The women and children were taken into slavery at that point. Again, that's Sunan Abu Dawud 2665. One woman, when she had seen the slaughter of her family, went into hysterics. She went under uncontrollable laughter. She was unable to control herself. And she's watching people being beheaded, and she's laughing. She can't help but laugh. And it annoyed the people enough, annoyed the Muslims enough, annoyed Muhammad enough to order her to be beheaded as well. So we know at this time that one woman was beheaded. This story is recounted through Aisha in Sunan Abu Dawud. So Aisha at this time is about 12 years old, and she's watching all these people get beheaded. She's watching this woman go into hysterics. She doesn't quite understand what was going on at the time. So when you see the hadith, she's not very compassionate, and it's probably because she didn't quite understand what was going on. Soon thereafter, a lot of the women, the property was confiscated, and a lot of the women were sold in the slave market, in a distant slave market. There wasn't much property. These people were mostly farmers, and so trading them in the slave market was a lot better for any sort of martial expeditions. Any questions? Let's talk about the ugly briefly. We mentioned yesterday how Muhammad was married to a 6-year-old girl, again, Aisha. It was said that she was betrothed to Muhammad, that Muhammad asked for her hand in marriage when she was 6. So he's 49, she's 6. He goes to his best friend, whose daughter was Aisha. His best friend was Abu Bakr. You'll remember that name because he was the first caliph of Islam after Muhammad died, so he was the successor. But he wasn't at this point. Muhammad goes up to Abu Bakr and he says, Allah has shown me that I should marry your daughter. And Abu Bakr basically says, how can you do that? He shows some hesitance. He's like, how can you marry her? And he doesn't cite her age. He says, you and I are like brothers. And the Quran says you can't marry your brother's daughter. And Muhammad says, well, we're not blood brothers, and so I can marry your daughter. So Abu Bakr initially showed some hesitation, but Muhammad pressed on, and he was able to marry Aisha at the age of 6. Now, that doesn't mean she went into his home at that time. In our Western conception, it'd probably be better to say that she was betrothed to him at that point. She didn't enter his home until the age of 9. Now, Imam Bukhari tells us that she was, at that time, still playing with dolls, which others have said is a sign of the fact that she had not reached puberty. She was not yet mature in the sight of the society around her. So when she was 9 years old, taken into Muhammad's home for the purpose of consummation, she had not yet reached puberty according to some sources. Again, how accurate is all this? Who knows? But this is in the sources. I have listed Sahih Muslim 3309 here. There are a ton. There are a ton of sources on this. If you want to see them all, we did a quick video on this issue. By we, I mean my friend David and I. By the way, I didn't tell you this yesterday. At the end, after my friend David helped lead me to the Lord, he and I joined a ministry together. We call it Acts 17 Apologetics. So up until last year, I was a part of that ministry. He and I did a lot together. One of the things we did together was a video on this issue. We went to the Islamic Society of North America's National Conference in 2009, and we wanted to see the kinds of stuff they were teaching. We recorded some sessions. We looked at some of their pamphlets and whatnot. And if you go to YouTube and you type in ISNA, I-S-N-A, child bride, you'll have a whole video on this issue. Of course, a lot of these issues you can find online, but you'll find a lot more of the sources written there in case you're interested. One of the other ugly issues that we talked about yesterday was the treatment of female captives. The Quran declares that it is appropriate to have sexual intercourse with female prisoners. I gave you the verse number 424 for that. There are other verses as well, and hadith clarify it. So let's look at one of those verses, Surah 23, 1 through 6. The believers must win through those who humble themselves in their prayers. This is basically giving characteristics of believers, of Muslims. Those who humble themselves in their prayers, those who avoid vain talk, who are active in deeds of charity, who abstain from sex, except with those joined to them in the marriage bond, or the captives whom their right hands possess. For in their case, they are free from blame. In other words, this verse is saying you can engage in sexual intercourse with your 4 wives, or any number of your female captives. Surah 70, verses 22 through 30 say something similar, giving a list of characteristics of good Muslims. Those who remain steadfast to their prayer, those in whose wealth is recognized right for the needy, in other words, they give of their wealth to the poor. Those who hold to the truth of the day of judgment. So, here you can see a lot of cool stuff. They pray a lot. They give to the needy. They're remembering the day of judgment. And they fear the displeasure of their Lord. But then you get this part. Those who guard their chastity, except with their wives, and those captives whom their right hands possess. Now, the word captives is in parenthesis because there is no Arabic parallel to that. But this is basically giving you the explanation that we find from hadith. And here's an example. From Sahih Bukhari, Book 34, number 432. While he was sitting with Allah's apostle, he said, "O Allah's apostle, we get female captives as our share of booty, and we are interested in their prices. What is your opinion about coitus interruptus?" In other words, we want to sell these women, but we don't want to get them pregnant, so what if we pull out early? The Prophet said, "Do you really do that? It's better for you not to do it, because no soul which Allah has destined to exist, no soul that which Allah has destined to exist, but will surely come into existence." In other words, it doesn't matter whether you pull out or not, because if Allah wants them to be born, they'll be born. Note, he doesn't condemn the sexual intercourse, he condemns pulling out. These are specifically female captives who have just been caught, who they want to sell. And this is found in Sahih Bukhari, number 34. So this is explicating exactly what the Quran is saying when it says what it means by captives who are allowed, or those whom their right hands possess. Bukhari, the most trustworthy book according to Muslims, makes it clear. We find something similar in Sahih al-Muslim. Abu Sa'id al-Khudri reported that at the Battle of Hunayn, Allah's Messenger sent an army to Autas and encountered the enemy and fought with them. Having overcome them and taken them captives, okay, so he's just captured these guys. The companions of Allah's Messenger seemed to refrain from having intercourse with the captive women because their husbands were polytheists. Okay, so they're not worried about having sex with these women for any reason except that their husbands are polytheists. They're unclean. Then Allah Most High said, "Don't even worry about that. And women already married except those whom your right hands possess." So he essentially said, you guys are not having sex with these women for some reason or another. Don't worry about it. Feel free to do so. That's found in Sahih al-Muslim. That, again, was the thing I simply could not overlook as a Muslim. When I was reading these sources, when I was understanding what the Quran meant, this was found in the Quran. This is found in Sahih Bukhari. This is found in Sahih Muslim. It's not something we can just throw out. It's at the most trustworthy level of Islamic history, according to Muslims. And it's just a bit too ugly. There are also some spiritual issues at play here. I'll power through these. We talked about yesterday how Muslims saw the initial revelation. You remember how Muhammad was in the cave of Hira, he's praying, he's fasting, potentially fasting, he was definitely praying though. And An angel comes to him, Gabriel, and embraces him and says, recite. You remember that story from yesterday? Here's what the sources actually say. Now, that's how Muslims generally tell it to each other. That's how I had heard it from childhood. But here's what the sources actually say. Muhammad, while sitting in the cave, all of a sudden was visited by a spiritual being. That being grabbed him so forcefully and squeezed him so tightly that Muhammad thought he was going to die. At this point, that spiritual being says, recite, Iqra. And Muhammad says, I don't know how to recite. So the spiritual being grabs him again and squeezes him so tightly, Muhammad thinks he's about to die. Then it lets go. And it says, recite. And he says, I don't know how. A third time, squeezes him so tightly, he thinks he's going to die. And then he says, recite. And Muhammad says, okay, fine. What then shall I recite? He doesn't say, okay, fine, but he says, what then shall I recite? So what you have here, let me finish the story. That is when the angel gives him the first verses of Surah Al-Alaq, chapter 96 of the Quran. So chronologically, chapter 96 of the Quran is the first. Muhammad then runs out of the cave and he goes to his wife and he says, cover me or smother me because I am possessed either by a demon or a poet. He said that. And his wife says, tell me what happened. She brings a blanket and she covers him. And so the shaking stops. And he says to her what happened. And she says to him, no, you're not possessed. This was the angel Gabriel that came to you. Over the next few years, the Fatrat-e-Wahi that we talked about, where Muhammad did not go into public ministry, he just talked to his friends. Over those few years, according to Sahih al-Bukhari, Muhammad would go to mountaintops and try to throw himself off and commit suicide because he hadn't received any further message from this angel. At those times, just when he's about to throw himself off the top of the mountain, an angel would appear and say, do not kill yourself, I am an angel. So for the next 2 or 3 years after that, Muhammad thought he might be possessed and he was depressed and he tried to commit suicide. Multiple times. This is found in Sahih Bukhari. If you want to ask where it was, I think it's book number 9, hadith number 111. I will double check during the break though. This is problematic. You do not see any of the prophets of God in the Old Testament or the New Testament responding to inspiration in this way. Quite the opposite. Yeah, you do have people who fear the Lord, but you don't have people who get depressed and suicidal. The only person that we see who follows that kind of pattern is Judas. The spirit of Satan comes upon him. He does something, he realizes it was wrong, he gets depressed and effectively commits suicide. Muhammad himself thinks that the first time he receives this revelation, he may be possessed. This is problematic. No matter how you look at it, this is problematic. For those of you who are in the class, you watched the debate. It was a required debate between David Wood and Ali Atay. That's available online. Again, if you receive the curriculum for this course, whether you're in the course or not, take a look at the curriculum and watch this debate. It's for free online, or you could purchase it off of Amazon. Ali Atay defends this. He says he has to admit that this is an accurate source because it's in Sahih Bukhari. But he defends it by saying Muhammad was scared, and of course we would all be scared if something like that happened to us. That's pretty weak. I don't think it would look like that. Another difficult thing are the satanic verses. Now this could be a whole day's lecture in itself, but we have to keep it short. Early on in Muhammad's time in Mecca, there are multiple sources which indicate that while Muhammad was preaching, he said that it was okay to bow to the 3 exalted cranes, Allat, Al-Uzza, and Al-Manat. These are 3 goddesses that the Meccans worshipped at that time. So while leading prayer, in other words, while reciting Quran, Muhammad received a revelation which said it is okay for you to bow to these 3 exalted cranes, Allat, Al-Uzza, Al-Manat. The Meccans, upon hearing this, rejoiced. Again, remember, the Meccans are against Muhammad's monotheism. It's going to destroy their commerce. When they hear Muhammad say this, they rejoice, and all of a sudden, everyone bows together. Meccans and Muslims alike. They bow together. Everyone's of one accord. As the story goes, Muhammad left that area and then was rebuked by Allah. Allah said, "What is this you have done?" I'm accounting to you, by the way, what the Muslim sources say. "What is this you have done?" And Muhammad is frightened. And Allah says, "That which you recited was not for me, it was from Satan." And so Muhammad goes back and he tells everyone, that verse was from Satan. And then Allah assuages Muhammad. He says, "Don't worry. All prophets have accidentally recited things from Satan because Satan plays with their desires." And that verse is still found in the Quran today. The part about the exalted cranes is not found in the Quran, but the verse about Satan who was able to throw things into the desires of the other prophets, that is found in the Quran today. When you look at the number of sources that say this, it is pretty astounding. 38 sources in early Islamic history recount this event. If you want to see a detailed treatment of this issue, there was a PhD out of Harvard, or Yale, was it? I think it was Harvard, whose name is Shahab Ahmed. Shahab Ahmed. He wrote his dissertation on the satanic verses. He himself is Muslim, and he concluded that the satanic verses, because of the historical record, are accurate. This actually happened. So as a Muslim, he concludes that this happened. If you want to read his dissertation, Shahab Ahmed, you can find it online. I think through ProQuest, you'd be able to request it directly from Harvard.
Could you spell that,
actually? Shahab. Last name is Ahmad, I believe. And if you're in the class, I'll see if I can't send this to Professor Lewis so he can upload it onto Blackboard. You know, I might have actually already done that. You should check and see if it's on Blackboard under the files. Yep.
You know the reference in the Quran where it talks about the...
I'll look it up for you. I don't know offhand. There's a lot that goes into play with the satanic verses. Most Muslims throw it out because it's not found in the Sahih. It's not found in Sahih, it's not found in Sunan Abu Dawud, it's not found in the most trustworthy source of hadith. And it's pretty clear why it's not found. It puts Muhammad in a very negative light. So when it comes to the criterion of embarrassment, this causes a lot of problems. But you have to wonder why it's found in any Muslim sources at all, if it was a fabrication. A lot of Muslims defend this by saying that it is what is called an Israeliyat, which means something that the Jews were able to penetrate into Islamic tradition. A lot of things are accounted for as Israeliyat, the Jews messing with Muslim tradition. A good account for how that happened is never really provided, but you'll see that a lot, and the satanic verses are given as an account of that. One last thing real quick is that Muhammad himself admitted to being the victim of black magic. He said for a period of about a year, if not more, he believed he was having sexual intercourse with his wives when he in fact was not. And when confronted about this, he realized that he had been under black magic, which of course was also the doing of Jews. So regardless of whether or not this actually happened, it's problematic that it's in the sources, and it's in some trustworthy sources. All of these issues, by the way, are brought up in David's debate with Aliyah. So if you want to watch that debate, I think it's one of the best debates on Muhammad. It's very hard to find a good debate on Muhammad because most Muslims don't even allow you to bring him to the table. If you want to go debate, one of the caveats for most Muslim debaters is I'll debate whatever you want as long as you don't talk about Muhammad. It's very interesting. I've run into that a lot. I've done 16 public debates with Muslims, and this was said to me usually on most of those debates. My parents had told me, though, never to talk about Muhammad, and for a long time I honored that. So I've never debated that issue publicly, but in sessions like this, I'll talk about Muhammad. So in conclusion, on the historical Muhammad, Really, when we're honest with the sources, when we come at it scholastically, we have to conclude that the sources for the historical Muhammad are of dubious reliability. We just can't know much about Muhammad with certainty. Now, we can know some about Muhammad with not much certainty, but when it comes to being relatively sure, it's hard because so many of the sources are infiltrated with fabrications that it's hard to extricate that which is accurate. But if we do trust the sources, as Muslims often do, the picture that they paint of Muhammad is not flattering, and we really end up with a dilemma. Why should we accept Muhammad if these hadith are accurate, if these sirah are accurate? But if they are not to be trustworthy, not to be trusted, then there is no reason to accept him as a prophet. The Shahada, which says there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, the first pillar of Islam, the rallying call of Islam, there's no basis for it if we throw out the hadith and the sirah. But if we accept the hadith and the sirah, you really can't conclude that he's a prophet because they say so many negative things about him. Those are the two horns of the dilemma there.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.